The first time I saw the cat, the evening sky was the color of cooling ash. The last shop on Rowan Street had just rolled down its shutter, and the town square, usually a swirl of motorbikes and soft chatter, hung in a hush that felt practiced, like someone had pressed pause on a scene. I was carrying a cardboard box of old paperbacks, moving out of my small rented room above the bakery to a quieter place near the river. The box was heavier than it looked, or maybe the silence had weight. I stopped at the painted pedestrian crossing and set the box on the curb to flex my fingers. That was when the cat stepped out from the shadow of the street lamp. It was larger than any cat I'd seen. Long-limbed, sleek, and perfectly black, as if the night had decided to borrow a shape. Its fur didn't reflect the light. It absorbed it, making the yellow halo of the lamp feel suddenly modest. The cat lifted its head, and I saw its eyes. A deep, steady red, not glowing, not flashing, just quietly, unmistakably crimson. We stared at each other for a breath. I'm not afraid of animals, but my heartbeat bristled like a startled bird. The cat stood in the center of the white stripes as if it had been painted there on purpose. No cars. No footsteps. Even the distant clink of glassware from the cafe had faded. I glanced down to adjust my grip on the box, and when I looked up again, the cat was gone. No rustle, no scuffle, only a faint impression, as if the air remembered it. I told myself I was tired. Moving always folds the day into a strange shape. I carried the box across the square, past the statue of the old town founder with his bronze hand raised in a welcome that never quite reached his eyes, and turned onto Willow Lane. By the time I reached the river house, crickets had stitched a steady rhythm into the night. The house was small and wooden, painted a shy blue that looked almost grey after dusk. On the porch sat 2 empty planters and a wind chime made of mismatched spoons that blinked softly whenever a breeze moved through the trees. Inside, the rooms were simple. 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, a narrow living room with a window that framed the river like a modest photograph. I set the box down and switched on a lamp. The bulb hesitated before blooming. Dust made slow galaxies in the beam. I unpacked until the clock said 10. When I finally opened the window to let the air in, the river answered with a scent of wet stones and leaves. Somewhere a frog clicked, patient and precise. I liked it. I liked how the house felt honest. No layers of voices soaked into the walls. No history I had to make peace with. Just the soft breath of water and the realignment of boards as the temperature shifted. I made tea and took the mug to the window. Across the river was a thin seam of trees, then the silhouette of the hill, and above it the sky, wide and uncomplicated. The wind chime stirred, 1 spoon gently touching another. The sound was small and harmless. I sipped. The tea was too hot and tasted slightly metallic, but warmth felt like agreement. Then I saw the red eyes again, reflected in the window before I realized anyone, or anything, was outside to reflect. I turned slowly. On the far end of the porch, sitting neatly beside the planter as if it had always belonged to the house, was the black cat. Its posture was regal, tail curled, head lifted. The red eyes were steady and thoughtful. I stood very still. The cat didn't blink. For a moment, the spoon chime was the only thing alive. "Hello," I said, because my voice needed to anchor itself to something. "You're a long way from the square." The cat tilted its head, like it had caught a distant sound that I couldn't hear. It was close enough that I noticed details the street lamp hadn't revealed. A subtle pattern in the fur, not stripes exactly, more like flows of shadow, ears that seemed a fraction sharper than ordinary, whiskers that caught the porch light in thin silver arcs. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't friendly. It was attentive, which felt stranger. I put the mug down on the window ledge. "Are you hungry?" I asked, though I didn't have anything a cat would reasonably want. The cupboard held tea, sugar, and salt. I'd planned to shop in the morning. The cat stood. Its movement was smooth and precise, like a line drawn with a practiced hand. It took 3 steps toward the door, then looked at me again, not at my face, but at the space beside me, as though there was something or someone standing at my shoulder. The porch light flickered. A moth tapped against the bulb and fell. I reached for the doorknob, unsure of what I'd do once I opened it. The cat's eyes deepened, not brighter, but deeper, as if looking through me changed their color. On the river, something splashed. I flinched. The cat didn't. The wind chime sounded again, 2 notes, then a third that didn't seem to come from the same metal. It rang as if the air around the porch had become a hallway. The cat turned its head toward the sound, then toward the planters, then toward the river, in a sequence so deliberate it felt like a sentence. I turned the knob. The porch smelled like rain that hadn't happened. The boards creaked a greeting under my feet. The cat stepped back but didn't retreat. We were 2 respectful strangers on the border of a shared room. "I don't have food," I said softly, "but you can sit." The cat sat. We stayed like that long enough for the tea to cool behind me and the moth to regain its courage. I listened for the part where my fear would arrive, but it didn't, not exactly. What arrived instead was a memory I didn't recognize. A pedestrian crossing, long before today, no cat, just the same sense of a town pausing to let something pass that wasn't visible. I realized my hands had folded themselves, as if waiting. "Do you belong to someone?" I asked. The question felt childish, but the quiet wanted ordinary words. The cat lifted one paw and set it down on the edge of a planter. The planter was empty, but the soil remembered shape. It had once held something tall, something the wind had leaned on. The paw pressed gently, testing, like a pianist touching a silent key. Then the cat looked at the door frame. Not at the door, at the frame, where the grain of the wood made a line that curved slightly at shoulder height. A notch I hadn't noticed was carved there, shallow but deliberate, a mark like a letter that had lost its alphabet. The porch light steadied. I stepped closer to see the notch. It was smooth, not new. A long time ago, someone had pressed a tool into the timber and turned it just enough to leave a sign. The shape wasn't familiar, but it felt like a reminder. Beside me, the cat made a small sound, not a meow or a purr, but something between, a syllable that belonged to listening more than speaking. "What are you showing me?" I asked. The cat stood again, walked to the edge of the porch, and gazed down the path that led to the river steps. The path shone faintly, a ribbon of pale dirt stitched with pebbles. The cat's red eyes settled on the last step before the water. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The night moved around it. I followed the cat's gaze. The last step had a split down the middle where water had chewed at it during heavy rains. In the split was something small. Metal, I thought, caught like a coin in a crack. I hesitated, then descended the steps, counting them like a child making sure a rhyme works. The air cooled with each step. The river smelled closer. At the final stair I crouched. The metal glinted. It wasn't a coin. It was a charm, the kind children buy at street fairs and thread onto bracelets. A thin disc with a cut-out silhouette of a cat in the center. The edges were dulled, its chain long gone. I slid it free. It came up with a soft ring of grit. Behind me, the wind chime spoke again. 1 spoon, then 2, then the smallest, a sound like turning a page. I looked back at the porch. The cat had not moved, but the red eyes had warmed, less like a warning light, more like embers that remember a story. I lifted the charm toward the porch light. The cut-out cat shape was elegant, familiar. Around the rim was a pattern I recognized, suddenly, with a strange certainty. The same curved line carved into the doorframe. "Is this yours?" I asked, and surprised myself by meaning it. The cat's tail flicked, once. Something changed in the air, a small shift, the way a theater changes when the curtain lifts. The river, which had been merely a presence, began to speak in detail. The lilt of eddies, the quiet knock of driftwood under the reeds, the speech of water on stone. The house, which had felt new, seemed older. Not haunted. Lived in. Watched over. I closed my fingers around the charm. It was colder than it should have been, though the night was mild. When I climbed back onto the porch, the cat rose and met me at the threshold. It didn't come inside. It looked at my closed hand, then at my eyes, then, again, at that space beside me where I kept feeling a companion I couldn't see. "I don't know what you want me to do," I said. The cat blinked slowly once, and then stepped backward, exactly one pace, as if clearing room. The wind moved through the spoons. The smallest spoon chimed a note that trembled in the wood. The lamp on the inside table flickered again, very slightly, and in that half flicker, the window became a mirror. And in the mirror, just for an instant, I saw more than me. A woman, hair braided over one shoulder, standing where I stood but not wearing what I wore. Her expression was solemn, resolved. In her hand, the same charm. The light steadied. The mirror became a window again. The woman was gone. The cat was still there, patient and enormous, the red eyes calm. I opened my hand. "Okay," I said, and my voice sounded like a promise. "I'll keep it safe." The cat stepped forward and pressed its forehead lightly to the back of my knuckles. There was no heat, only a quiet pressure that felt like acceptance. Then it turned, walked to the top of the steps, and sat, facing the river as if keeping a post. When I finally slept, the charm on the bedside table caught the stray glow from the street and returned it in a thin ring. In my dream, the pedestrian crossing returned, the white stripes, the pause, the invisible passage. And this time, when I looked up, the cat waited on the far curb, watching to see if I would understand the way forward. I woke before dawn to the sound of the smallest spoon. Morning arrived without drama, only a pale quilt of cloud and the orderly murmur of water working at the edges of the yard. I woke to the spoon chime tapping once. No pattern, just a hello that seemed to come from the room itself. The charm lay on the bedside table like a neat punctuation mark after an unfinished sentence. For a soft half-minute, I forgot about the red eyes at the porch and the mirror that had briefly shown more than me. Then memory took its places as calmly as cups on a shelf. I boiled water and watched steam braid itself in the shaft of light. The house adjusted, boards easing, window frame breathing out a puff of cool air when I unlatched it. Outside, dew stitched the railing in tiny silver. The planters held dark, hopeful soil. The river moved with steady speech, not urgent, not lazy, telling the same story it had told long before the house learned to listen. I stepped onto the porch expecting the cat to keep sentinel, large and composed, eyes like dark embers. It wasn't there. Instead, a small leaf, pressed flat and papery, rested at the threshold, like a calling card left by the night. I picked it up. A maple, thin as memory, its veins drawn like a map of local roads. The house rewarded small attention. In the kitchen, a drawer snagged near the back. Careful patience freed it, revealing a folded napkin and, beneath that, another pressed leaf. On the underside of the drawer, lightly scratched into the wood, was the curved mark I'd found in the doorframe, paired with a tiny cat silhouette, a signature I was learning to recognize. The same motif hid on the back of a cupboard door, under the window ledge where wiping hands had nearly erased it, and into the grain of the porch post where weather had polished the cut smooth. Someone had tucked assurances into the structure, reminders that watching had been done here before and would be done again. At 9, a neighbor's knock arrived with cheerful confidence. I opened the door to a woman in a yellow raincoat holding a box of green starts. "I'm Lorna," she said, smile ready. "You moved in last night." I brought basil and marigolds and one plant with a name I never remember, but it forgives me. "The porch has been waiting for these," I said, stepping aside. "Please come in." She laughed the way people laugh when something sounds true to their experience. We set the box on the table. Her gaze moved over the space, patient and assessing, pausing at the spoon chime and then the notch in the frame. "Haven't seen that little curve in a while," she murmured. "Mara's sign." I tried the name in the air. "Mara. Our teacher," Lorna said, easing into a chair like it had saved her a place. The house was hers a long time. Kind woman. Quiet, but her quiet wasn't distance, it was attention. She taught half the town to read and all of us to pause before crossing the street. Kept a cat too. Big one. Black as a new moon. It had a way of looking that made people remember their manners. My pulse lifted at the neat click of tail meeting fact. Did Mara make the marks? Those and others, Lorna said, tapping the table's underside where another faint curve waited. She said the river, the square, and this porch were like 3 corners of a frame. If folks kept them honest, the rest would follow. She carved reminders where the hand would find them on busy days, and where the eye would catch them on sad ones. We planted the seedlings together. The basil smelled green and friendly. Marigolds winked like small suns. Lorna talked as we set roots into the cool soil, not in a spill of gossip, but with the deliberateness of placing stones so a path stays dry. She told me about the cat that sat at the pedestrian crossing at dusk, about the way the square sometimes hushed for no visible reason, and about rain. One wild night when the river shouldered past its banks and people went door to door counting neighbors. Everyone accounted for except the teacher with the braid. No harm was found, but neither was she. The cat returned alone and waited on this porch, calm as if patience itself had a body. Folks say they still see it here and there, Lorna finished, brushing soil from her hands, when the town holds its breath. The square pauses, I said, remembering paint and hush and my odd sense that time could widen. I saw that last night. She nodded like I'd been accepted into a local custom. There's a scrapbook, she said. I'll bring it. Old clippings and notes Mara kept. She believed crossings weren't only paint on the road. After Lorna left, the day tugged me through the house like a friend showing a favorite library. In the living room, pale rectangles suggested where a bookshelf had once stood, sun keeping its respectful distance so paper wouldn't fade. In the bedroom closet, pencil marks measured someone's height at different ages. Initials I couldn't read and dates from years that felt nearby and far. Near the back door, under a loose floorboard, I found a tiny envelope containing a brass key too small for any door, tied with a length of blue thread. The envelope was stamped with the cat's silhouette. The key's teeth were delicate, like a lullaby written in metal. Evening folded in, soft as laundry. The cat returned to the porch without ceremony. One blink, then another. I brought a saucer of milk because the gesture was part of a story I understood. The cat ignored it with cordial dignity and stared instead at the charm that now hung on a spare cord around my neck. When the wind chime spoke 2 notes and a third, the cat's ears flicked, but its eyes never left the little disc. Is this the language? I asked the air. Wind, wood, water, and where you look. The floorboard by the window answered with a remembered groan. I stood there. The lamp hummed and steadied. The cat's gaze eased, as if approval had a temperature. I moved toward the doorframe notch and rested the charm there. The smallest spoon rang once, pleased. I realized I had walked a route without knowing, door to window to door, a loop someone had carved into the house so that careful feet would print it again and again. Near midnight, a soft knock came from the river steps. Not human, not alarming. The tap of glass. I brought a flashlight and followed the sound. A bottle rocked in the last ripple, caught by a reed. Inside, a folded note, sealed with wax bearing the cat's silhouette. My hands shook a little as I worked the cork free. The paper unfurled obediently. One precise sentence in a steady hand. Keep the crossing open. I read it aloud, and the air seemed to understand. Behind me, the spoons answered. 1, 2, then the smallest, a signature. I looked toward the porch. The cat had moved to sit beside the chime, eyes half closed, posture untroubled. The porch light drew a gentle ring on the charm at my throat. The river, content after its delivery, returned to its patient recitation. I'll try, I said, to the house, to the water, to the red eyes that watched without urgency. The cat blinked, slow as a promise. That night I slept with the note beneath my pillow. My dream was practical. White stripes, evening traffic, a pause not caused by fear but by respect. The dream changed nothing in the world and everything in me. When I woke near dawn, the smallest spoon sounded once, like a teacher taking attendance and finding me present. Keep the crossing open looked simple on paper and felt like a riddle in practice. A crossing is paint and habit. It's also the space where someone hurries and someone hesitates and a small mistake can grow teeth. I watched for a pattern. Morning gave me fog that lay low along the riverbank and lifted from the square like a curtain. Noon offered ordinary errands, postcards, bread, a nod to the bronze statue who permanent waved at everyone. Evening gave me the hush. The cat began appearing at dusk in the square as if clockwork had been installed in its bones. It sat exactly on the white stripes, never at the edge, never in the center line, like it understood balance. If a rider approached too fast, the cat's red eyes met headlight and something in the rider's posture softened. If a pedestrian paused, wondering whether to step out, the cat tilted its head with the kind of attention that turns doubt into decision. I started to think the eyes weren't a warning light. They were a mirror that reflected the safest choice back to whoever looked. Lorna arrived late one morning with a scrapbook wrapped in brown paper and tied with kitchen twine. "Borrowed from Mrs. Hyam across the lane," she said. "It spent years on Mora's bookshelf." We opened it at the table. Newspaper clippings had been glued onto sturdy pages. School fairs, river cleanups, a pet parade with a smiling child tugging a wagon that overflowed with kittens. Toward the back, a small item from years ago described a stalled truck at the square and a child who wandered off the curb. "Local teacher guides child to safety," the headline said. A paragraph down, a quaint sentence made my chest tighten. Witnesses mention an unusually large black cat sitting calmly at the painted lines, as if holding the scene in place. In the margin, in the same steady hand as my river note, Mora had written, "Guard rails for more than roads." Beneath the clippings were pages of tidy, dated entries. Weather and town moods jotted like a gardener's almanac. Fog low, cat restless. Festival day, music kind, crossing steady. Out-of-towner impatient, cat occupied middle stripe, no harm. It read like someone combining the sky with small fate. At the back was an envelope labeled "If I'm late." Inside lay a second, thinner notebook and a brass key that matched the one I had found under the floorboard. The thin notebook listed only times and tiny symbols. 3 circles for the square, a wave mark for the river, a curve with a notch for the porch. Between some symbols, a line. I traced the pattern with my finger. It described an evening walk. Porch, river bend, square, porch. A loop. A watch. By habit or guidance, I began to walk that loop at dusk with the charm tucked under my shirt. The first evening, dragonflies hovered above the river as if someone had told them to hold position for a count of 3. At the bend, a bottle bumped my shoe and offered nothing. Only water inside, which I poured back as if returning a greeting. At the square, the bronze statue's shadow pointed down Willow Lane, an arrow made of absence. The cat emerged from the shade of the lamp post and fell into step without touching me, the way a thought can parallel your own without interrupting it. A motorbike approached, then another 2 closely behind. The first slowed as it reached the stripes. The second didn't. I lifted my palm, not to command, only to exist clearly. The cat moved 2 paces forward, posture like a metronome in a music lesson. The second rider made the tiniest correction, break, breath, space, and the 2 passed through the crossing like thread through a needle. Nothing dramatic happened, and yet something was saved. The town's ability to finish its evening as if it had always intended to. The cat looked up at me afterward. In the reflection of its eyes, I saw no light. Only my own steadiness returned to me in a form I could use. On impulse, I rested my palm lightly on the painted line. The paint was warm from the day, a little gritty, very real. A crossing is proof that people decide together how to stay alive. I felt oddly grateful to whoever had first imagined white stripes as a promise. On the 3rd night of the loop, the river brought a bottle with a brass key inside, the twin of the one from the floorboard. It fit the stuck drawer in the kitchen. The drawer slid open to reveal a modest ledger. This was not weather, not clippings. It was the quiet work of attention. Market day, chatter bright. Cat absent and unnecessary. Tourist stepped without looking, caught sight of red eyes, paused. Wind chime 3 tonight. Do not ignore. The final entry was weeks older than today and written with a firmer hand. Water high. Keep the crossing open. Trust the cat if I can't return. I closed the ledger and heard the spoons in the doorway strike 1, 2, 3. The lamp dimmed, then steadied. The cat watched from the porch rail the way a lighthouse watches. Not scanning, just being exactly where it must. That night I dreamed of the square again, but the dream shifted. I was standing on the stripes when a crowd of choices walked toward me. Some of them would have become minor injuries or major grief if left alone. I did nothing grand. I stepped to one side and made space, held up my hand, met a pair of eyes, pointed with a nod, waited a beat. The dream scattered like dandelion seeds and settled as a single thought. Keeping something open is not the same as leaving it unguarded. When I woke, the smallest spoon chimed as if in answer. I made tea and wrote in the ledger, crossing steady. Learned the rhythm of the pause. The cat leapt from the porch and padded toward Willow Lane. Not looking back but certain I would follow. I did. The square, still early, had the feeling of a stage before actors arrive. The statue's shadow lay across the first stripe like a sash pinned at the shoulder. We stood in the middle of paint and air. The town breathed around us, unaware and grateful. I pressed the charm 2 times gently into the notch of the doorframe when I returned. The house answered with the faintest settling sound. Content, attentive, ready. It felt like passing a baton in a relay where the track circled through wood, water, and road. The crossing was open. Storms usually announce themselves with theater, thunder rehearsing in the distance, a wind that lifts hair and tempers. This one arrived like a curtain lowered by quiet hands. Afternoon went gray. Evening became a room with the lights turned down. Rain began as a fine mist and perfected itself into a steady fall that stitched the town together under a single sound. The wind chime spoke 3 times before dark and 3 more after. Not random. A phrase. The smallest spoon kept ending the sentence, precise and almost polite. Lorna phoned. "If you hear 3, she said, stay where the cat tells you. Some nights it knows the shape of trouble before we do." I walked the loop slowly, charm warm against my collarbone. The porch felt like a ship's deck. The river churned without anger, busy with its responsibilities. The square was almost empty, shops shuttered, umbrellas bobbing toward home. The cat appeared and aligned itself with my left step, then my right, then my left again, as if it had decided which side I should favor tonight. Halfway to the river bend, the power blinked. Houses became silhouettes, then outlines, then themselves again. The chime answered with a quick 3, and the cat pressed its paw to the doorframe notch. 1, 2, 3, mirroring the sound. I touched the charm to the notch for a count of 3, and the porch light steadied like a hand settling on a nervous shoulder. Footsteps splashed somewhere near the square. Quick, small, turning a circle of indecision. A child's voice floated through the rain, more confused than frightened. The cat turned its head toward the sound, and then toward the crossing with a motion so deliberate it might as well have been a sentence written in the air. We went. Rain softened near the square as if it respected boundaries. A boy stood on the white paint, umbrella forgotten, jacket had fallen back, eyes wide the way eyes get when streets look different at night. He pivoted, trying to find the shape of home in the soft gray. I crouched on the near curb, keeping my hands visible. "Hey there," I said, voice like library hours. "That paint is a safe place when the town is quiet. Let's use it properly. Which street is yours?" He blinked at my calm more than my words. The cat moved to stand between him and the space where a van could appear too fast from the side road. The boy's gaze fixed on the cat, then on me again, anchored by the oddness of red eyes that didn't threaten. Mama turned in to get a bag," he said, pointing toward a corner store gone dark. I looked at the rain and it felt like a hallway, and then, "Hallways take you somewhere when you decide," I said. "Let's decide to move to the curb, and we'll look together." He nodded, and we stepped. The cat didn't herd or hurt us. It simply existed where caution would have stood if it had a body. A woman rounded the corner then, umbrella tilted, calling a name that sounded like relief and apology. She scooped the boy close, gratitude spilling out as a flurry of thank yous. I told her the square is kind on rainy nights. I didn't mention the cat. I didn't need to. The boy, over his mother's shoulder, raised his hand and waved toward our silent companion. The cat blinked, which is a cat's way of waving when words would be too loud. Back at the porch, a bottle waited on the bottom step. Impossible even with the river shouldering past. Inside, a paper twist held nothing but a single clean sentence. If the house accepts you, the crossing will know your name. I read it aloud. The cat's red eyes warmed by a quiet degree, and the smallest spoon answered with a single, perfectly centered note, the way a conductor might close an evening concert with nothing more than a breath and the lowering of a hand. The rain continued, steady as a sewing machine. I walked the loop inside the house, door to door, pressing the charm to the notch each time I passed. Somewhere after midnight, the lamp flickered, and the window held my reflection as it had on that first night. The woman with the braid appeared again, not a shock now, only a truth the room could hold. She stood beside me for one heartbeat longer than before. Her expression was not sorrow. It was completion. I understood it the way you understand a melody when you finally hear the note that explains the chord. "I'll keep the crossing open," I said, not loudly, not for dramatic effect, but with the confidence of someone repeating the preferred phrasing. The river dipped in volume, as if acknowledging the statement. The cat left the doorframe and walked the length of the porch, close enough that the fringe of my sleeve felt the brief whisper of air its body parted. It sat at the top step like a sentry concluding a shift and watched the water as if the river were a schedule and dawn was the next appointment. Sleep came like a blanket laid over a chair. In my dream, the three-note chime translated itself into words. Wait. See. Guide. I woke before sunrise, the house carrying that phrase with the same ordinary grace it carried the smell of wet wood. The storm thinned toward morning. The square reappeared like a photograph coming into focus in a tray. People went about their day as though nothing had come and gone in the night, which was exactly the goal. I wrote in the ledger, three-note storm, child guided, house steady. Then I added a new line, which might have been Mara's sentence if she had been the one writing. Names don't matter to the crossing, but promises do. Days unfurled into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and ceremonial. I learned which floorboard near the window wanted a lighter step, which hinge asked for oil, which time of evening the river brightened with insects that stitched quick commas in the air. I watered basil and encouraged marigolds to stand like cheerful guards. The spoon chime rarely spoke more than once, and when it did, it was usually to correct my posture. Move, wait, look, listen. The town adjusted without needing to be told it was adjusting. Drivers slowed 2 beats earlier. Pedestrians looked both ways, and then a third. Children waved at the cat as if greeting a school crossing guard who wore elegant fur instead of a neon vest. The statue in the square threw its shadow more softly. If you had asked people why they'd changed, they might have said, new paint on the stripes, or rain taught me patience, or you know how evenings feel lately, gentler somehow. They wouldn't have said, because the cat's eyes show me my best self for half a second, but that was part of it. I kept the ledger. Tour bus paused politely, no prompting needed. Market day. Laughter full. Crossing self-sufficient. Summer couple nearly stepped early. Red eyes suggested a story about waiting, success. The act of writing settled me. Words can be a guardrail when paint fades. One evening, I realized the cat had not come at dusk. I waited on the porch longer than usual, listening to the river count itself like an accountant. Worry arrived politely and took a seat. I touched the charm to the notch and felt the wood accept the gesture with a soft sense of, yes, we're still doing this. The lamp flickered and did not go out. The window held my reflection and then, gently, hers. Mara stood beside me, braid over one shoulder, eyes calm with the kind of peace that isn't an absence but a fullness. She did not speak. She didn't need to. The house translated, trust isn't a chain. The charm warmed against my skin. I understood that the cat's watch was not an obligation pinned to a single life. It was a trust that moved across time like light moving across the floor as the day turns. When she faded, the room did not feel emptier. It felt correctly arranged. I stepped outside. The air smelled like iron and mint. In the grey pocket before dawn, the cat reappeared and walked the length of the porch, checking the perimeter not as if expecting trouble but as if greeting furniture by name. It paused at the top step and watched the river change key as morning tuned its instruments. We sat together without performance. The smallest spoon chimed once, and silence accepted the sound as if filing it under the correct date. I spoke aloud the sentence that had become a daily practice. Keep the crossing open. The cat did not nod. It didn't have to. Agreement lived in the space between us. In the following weeks, the house grew more itself. I learned the trick of turning the key in the back door so that it didn't complain. I repaired a loose bit of trim. Lorna brought a fresh bar of soap that smelled faintly of lavender and said, "The town sleeps better lately. Maybe it's the weather." We both knew weather had help. The river surprised me with a bottle only once that month. Inside, a tiny bell on a thin cord, too small to hear at a distance, clear as a drop of water when close. I tied it to the spoon chime, and it made a new note, soft as a yes said under the breath. That night, I dreamed of lines painted on different roads in different towns, and in every place a figure. Sometimes a person, sometimes an animal, sometimes just a feeling. Paused politely where lives cross and reminded hurry to share the world. The square gave me one more test. Not dramatic, not rare. A delivery van rolled toward the stripes, just as a woman pushing a stroller reached the curb. Each believed the other would wait. It is the simplest sort of mistake. I stepped forward, not into the lane, only into view, palm raised. The cat took position at the van's eye level. The driver saw posture rather than authority and chose ease over insistence. The woman smiled in that fragile way people do when they feel both brave and aware of their vulnerability. She crossed. The van idled. The town hummed. The cat blinked. I exhaled. That evening, I added to the ledger, no heroics required, just presence. I realized the ledger was less a record and more a guidebook for whoever might sit on this porch after me. So I wrote another line, not about today but about tomorrow. If you are reading this, the work is simple. Stand where attention is useful. Listen to wood, water, wind, and wheels. Let your calm be bright. Not long after, the cat skipped an entire day, then two. I felt the gap the way you notice a clock has stopped. Not panic, not loss, only an awareness that you're holding time yourself for a while. I walked the loop and pressed the charm to the notch and listened for bottles and wrote in the ledger and spoke to the square with my eyes. The town did not falter. It had learned the pause. On the third morning, just before sunrise, I found footprints on the damp porch, light, deliberate ovals leading from the step to the doorframe and back again. No other sign. The smallest spoon chimed a smile. I laughed softly, the sound surprising me with its lack of worry. If guardianship is a river, then you are the water for a while and later the air it returns to. When the cat returned, calm as ever, a shadow that fit exactly where it had always fit, it pressed its forehead to my knuckles as it had the first night. I understood it as not greeting but acknowledgement. You kept the crossing open. We sat at the step like two punctuation marks at the end of a good sentence. Sometimes at dusk now, if you stand at the square, you'll feel the hush and think it's the breeze settling. You'll see people glance both ways and then a third and not know that a cat taught them. You might catch, for half a second, eyes the color of autumn glass looking through you and showing you your safest self. If you follow the river with your gaze, you'll spot a small blue house with two planters and a chime that includes a tiny bell. And if you listen, truly listen, you'll hear the quiet line that holds the town together. We're watching. We're listening. We're keeping the crossing open. On the last page of the ledger, I left space. Someone will fill it. In a year, in a decade, on a morning when fog sits low and basil smells like good news. They'll add their handwriting to ours, small and careful. The cat will sit where it needs to. The house will steady the lamp. The river will carry messages and return them as needed. The square will pause, and an evening will continue with no one the wiser, which is the best ending for this kind of story. And if, one night, you come to the porch and find it empty and feel a brief ache where a form used to sit, Do not be afraid. Press your palm to the notch. Let the smallest spoon sound. Step into the painted lines and lend the town your presence. A crossing stays open because someone chooses, again and again, to be kind at the exact moment when hurry wants the last word. That's all it ever asked of me. That's all it will ever ask of you.